Okay, welcome, dear Laidlaw scholars. Welcome to our first edition of the online in conversation discussions around leadership. Today, I am joined by Kulveer Ranger. He is an UCL alumnus and an expert in the field of digital transformation. He's currently the Senior Vice President, Strategy and Communications for Atos, and he is a leading figure in the development and communication of innovative technology-led public services in the UK, and has a unique track record of working in politics, the public and private sectors over the last 20 years. This includes having worked on the delivery of the London Oystercard and 4 years of working for the Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, leading the transport and environment briefs and establishing the Digital London office. It is really a real pleasure to have Kulveer here and share his leadership insight. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Daniela Bultoc. I am the main trainer and facilitator for the leadership workshops for UCL, and it is really a pleasure to be here. So, Kulveer, welcome.
Hi, hello everyone, wherever you are in the world, because I believe this is a globally connected session today. Is that right, Daniela?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, a huge privilege to take part in this session with all of you, and thank you for sparing your time to come and listen to me. So I hope we'll have a really engaging conversation and plenty of questions, and I'm happy to take questions as we go along as well.
Absolutely, wonderful. Well, thank you for being here. And actually, I'll just start with a very simple question. I can see a bookcase behind you, and I wonder why you've actually positioned your book so nicely ordered behind you. Would you mind giving us a story on that before we even delve in the leadership discussion?
Yeah, well, look, first things first. I think I'm going to go a bit deep here straight away.
All right.
Is not perfect. Whatever you see, whatever you hear, whatever bios you read, stuff you see on social media, it's smoke and mirrors. I'm going to tell you why, and I'm going to give you that little bit of insight that nobody ever gives you, right? You ready?
That is wonderful.
A very nice bookcase behind me, but chaos in front of me. And the reason is I recently moved house. And having moved, obviously, we have lots of boxes. And I thought, I see all these people doing webinars and they always have interesting pictures or a nice room behind you, Daniela. None of my rooms are nicely set up yet. So I quickly opened one box and threw up whatever books I could find. And actually, I'm pretty proud about the ones I did find. It's about a lot of my old architectural books from UCL and some pretty interesting stuff about religion, management, and leaders. So I picked the right box. But remember, the real message is that the reality is always a lot messier than what you see.
What a great start. So just so everyone knows, we will be interviewing, or we'll have a very informal discussion with Kulveer. So that will be for about 40 minutes, and then we can open the questions. However, Kulveer is actually very happy for you to ask questions throughout our conversation. So that means that if you would like to ask a question, feel free to make use of the emoticons or the reactions in the bar at the bottom of your screen, or feel free just to type your questions in the chat box. Chris Cullen from UCL will be the moderator today, and hopefully, Ruth, if you spot any questions that I might miss, please do feel free to stop me and say, Daniela, we have a question from one of our Laidlaw scholars. But Kulveer, given that you have been at UCL, you've been a student at UCL, can you tell us a little bit about your time at UCL? And also tell us a little bit why you chose to study here and what have been some of the highlights for you at UCL?
You know, look, firstly, when you get asked to speak about things like this and to speak to your old university, people at your old university and on a course like this, you start reminiscing. And also, I've probably had a bit of lockdown fever, plenty of time to reminisce. So I've been thinking back to my university days. And I think one of the things is the friendships that you make at university and in courses that you do. It's really interesting. For me, they seem to have been much tighter and much stronger because you had a lot more in common, but also you were growing with those people at that time. And I think you told me, Danielle, that most people on this course are about 18, 19, 20 years old. You know, there are a few others, but it's a real formative time, and you can feel that pressure. You can feel it's an formative time for you, but also it's a real sense of freedom. You get to explore and meet so many people. And one of the things is that I really did explore at university, and I mean that in the sense that you can probably see I wear a turban, I have a beard, I am a Sikh. And so people immediately take a view of who you are and decide who you are. But when I went to university, I met so many different people, and nobody took the first view of, oh, you're a Sikh. The first thing that everybody asks you is, what course are you studying? Right? And you're defined by what course you do. And then it's about which society are you in. And obviously, I'm talking about now a good 25 years plus away. So I'm sure there are still university societies and all that kinds of stuff going on. But these are the things that define you. And it's a really interesting time because you emerge from your own personal character or how other people define you. You have the opportunity to frame your own self. And it's exciting. And I met lots of friends, made loads of friends. But what I did was I took the opportunity to grasp and do completely different things. And one of the things I did was I thought, you know, why not? By the way, I didn't do this before I went to university. I'll become a DJ. I had 2 records. By the way, in some of these boxes right now are some of the hundreds of records I still have from university days. But I had 2 records, and it's a very long and boring story, really. But eventually, I got to meet some really good friends who are my friends for life. In fact, my best friend, who was there back then, is still my best friend. We eventually got onto social committee at UCL. I was part of union council. I won my first ever election. And by the way, the only election I've ever won. And the small trick in doing that, by the way, everyone, is stand unopposed. So I stood unopposed and became social officer for UCL and the union in 2004-05. We set up a night, a party night in the union called Cocktails. Now, most people weren't even born who were on this call when we did that. But you know, it was a really funny time. Not funny time. It was a fantastic time for music in the 90s. There was hip hop, there was swing, there was guitar music. There were bands like Oasis and Blur, Fatboy Slim. Lots and lots of diverse music that I loved and lots of people loved. And we put it all together and created this fantastic student night that became the most successful student night ever in London. Now, how can I quantify that? Because when you make grand statements like that, you really should quantify it. So I'll tell you this, that at the end of that student year, in a not-for-profit organisation, we managed to make £250,000 for UCL Union. And even back then, that was a lot of money. And it was really nicely acknowledged because the provost awarded myself and my friend colours for it. We awarded social colours. And the following year, we reinvested that money into redeveloping the union. So friendship, experiences, exciting times, fun times, learned a lot, did a lot, fantastic university, amazing people, one of the world's best. But also the reason I went there, and I have to make this absolutely clear, is I was passionate about architecture from the age of 10. I loved art, I loved drawing. In fact, around this house are all pictures that I need to put up into frames and on walls. And I wanted to go somewhere that sort of resonated with my own view of architecture. And the Bartlett School of Architecture, even in that limited experience I had back then, was just an exciting place, and I think still is to be for architects. And so I was privileged enough to get in, go there, and then everything else at UCL is followed.
Wow. It looks like Ruth actually remembers you now. She remembers the cocktail nights. She even says that she went to a few of them. And I know, Kulveer, when we spoke, you said that on the first night you actually had so many people coming that you had to turn them away.
Yeah. Well, it was every Thursday, and eventually it became, we kept raising the price to stop people coming. Because actually the union back then was quite small. It had a capacity of about 600-700 people. We'd have 1,000 people inside and 1,000 people outside still trying to get in. And obviously UCL is affiliated to many other colleges, so you'd get people, as word spread, from other colleges coming. So yeah, we'd hire coaches and vans,
Yes.
to take people away to other clubs and bars because we didn't want to lose our fire license. So yes, it was great. A huge success. Lovely times.
Yeah. Wow. Congratulations. It really sounds like you had the time of your life then. And one of the questions that actually comes to me, kind of reflecting on what you said, what influence do you think UCL perhaps had on your UCL journey? And also, did you have a plan of what might had to happen next?
The honest answer is, and it probably resonates with a lot of what I've done in my life, is I've never had a really clear plan, but I've had a clear instinct for what I want to do and what I don't want to do. And I think that there's something about leadership. We are talking about leadership. And again, I've been sort of ruminating on this about what is it that can make my own personal leadership come through. And yes, you can have objectives of things you want to do in life and things you want to achieve. But that gets balanced out by what feels right at that time, in that moment. And so your objectives can change because maybe something you wanted to do, suddenly you've experienced something that actually changes that because you feel differently. And every day we feel differently. So to put that bluntly in terms of, say, UCL, I went there passionate about architecture, passionate to become an architect, had this dream since I was 10, got to the university of my choice. But as I neared the end of my course, I realized I didn't want to be an architect. And the reason for that was having gone through that arc of experiences, and not just the study, which was intense and hard, I have to say, I realized that I didn't feel I had the passion that I needed to get to where I wanted to get to in architecture. So I needed to find something that my passion mapped to that would get me where I wanted to go. And I wasn't sure what I was. So having graduated, having told everyone I knew since the age of 10 that I would be an architect, I then decided I wasn't going to be an architect. And that's a lot of people find that challenge. They can go to university and think, I'm going to be a lawyer, doctor, economist, whatever course it is or profession you want to do. But somewhere on the line, you can change, or your mind and heart can change. And, don't feel worried by that because things happen.
Yes. And actually your career journey, it's quite interesting. Because what did you do after the university, and what do you think has helped you to get to the next step?
I spent years telling everyone I wasn't an architect because everyone would say, oh, you're an architect. I was like, no, I'm not, which is true. I had to spend a lot of time rebranding myself, which is probably what they would call it nowadays. But no, the thing I find that, and I have spoken to a number of students before, so I can understand, and I felt it as well, we all do, that when you leave university, people suddenly expect you have a clear view of what the rest of your life is going to look like, what you're going to do, what it's going to be. And then people like me, 25 years down the line, can say, oh, I had this journey. Absolutely not. I didn't. I feel life is more an adventure, an exciting adventure where you have opportunities. You have opportunities to experience things, to travel. And believe you me, you will travel again. Despite what's happening now, in the future, we will all travel again. But you meet different people and you take on board and absorb these things that mean that your life is not a linear path. It's not just a direct route from A to B. It's a wiggly, windy road that sometimes takes you up and sometimes can take you down as well. But all of these things give you the opportunity to learn. And that sounds like a cliche, but it's absolutely true. You learn as much from succeeding as you do from failing. And I don't mean by just failing as in getting something wrong, but failing and doing something and feeling, I haven't quite made the right decision. I don't think this is the right thing for me. That's not failure. That's self-awareness and acknowledgement that you're probably not doing something that is going to make you ultimately happy. And then don't worry, go again and try and look again for what might make you even happier.
One of the things that you've mentioned, which really perhaps resonates with quite a few of us, is the fact that you had the courage to rebrand yourself, as you said. It's almost like you need to redefine your identity. And I'm sure that many of us might choose a certain degree thinking that this is what will shape us, and this is what will actually help us to go on our next step in career. But actually, there are moments, as you said, on this path or in this adventure where you might need to change if you're aware of certain opportunities that come your way. And obviously, you actually got to work even with Boris Johnson. How did you get there? And obviously, from UCL architecture to working in politics with Boris Johnson is quite a step. Tell us a little bit about what helped you to get there.
Yes, and the first thing I'll say is that I have had a huge political involvement in my life. I had no political involvement when I was at UCL. I barely had enough time to study and do the whole DJing and UCL thing, but I'd done politics. And I wasn't really overly interested in politics at university. It was something in the background. And by the way, for those who can remember or know their history, during the mid-90s, Tony Blair was Prime Minister. It was quite a stable time, actually, compared to what's happened in the last 20, 25 years in political history. There was some interesting things, challenging things happening in Iraq and other places. But Britain was quite a stable country. So politics wasn't at the forefront of the national agenda as maybe it has been over the last few years. But I became more politically aware through becoming more involved in work and questioning things. And I think, again, it comes back to, qualities about where you want to go, what you want to do. If you find a passion through questioning something and even challenging something, then follow that passion, follow that pathway, because it can lead you to some very interesting places. And where my questioning of how we were delivering infrastructure, transport projects, I got my first job in management consultancy, got me involved in some very major infrastructure programs and projects. I was very fortunate to be exposed to them. But it got me thinking about both the time that was being spent on these projects. They last decades. Sometimes they didn't happen. Hundreds of millions of pounds of taxpayer money. How I see it, your and my money. If you're a taxpayer, it's our money being spent. Sometimes I felt not in the best way. So as a young person with energy, enthusiasm, and an inquisitive mind, I decided to chase this a bit more than just doing my job. And that led me into the political debate, into the political conversation, and yes, I'm a card-carrying member of the Conservative Party, but to meet people who were like-minded with that view, and met people who are now very senior politicians. Boris Johnson, I wonder what happened to him after he left being the mayor of London.
I do too.
Yeah, but I met Boris through, he was already an MP. I had a real passion for London. Look, I'm a passionate Londoner. I live and breathe London. I've been born here, grew up here, went to UCL here. And although I've traveled the world, I absolutely believe London is the greatest city in the world. No offense to any other city. But you feel that you could improve things. And so I'd worked on other mayoral campaigns. And then when Boris went to the mayoralty, worked on his campaign. And then with my experience in infrastructure, transport, and working in that sector, Boris asked me to support him and be his advisor on transport when he went into City Hall.
What a story. And I really like the way you've actually been very open to be courageous on this adventure. And again, I really like the way you call your career as an adventure. It's not necessarily a well-established plan that has a strategy and you know exactly what comes next. And actually, COVID-19 has showed us that actually we do not know what comes next. And it is about having that open-mindedness about opportunities that come your way. So kind of taking it now onto the leadership theme and kind of aspect of some of the insights that you've probably learned from your own journey, from your own adventure in your career. What have been some of the most memorable moments, or what has influenced perhaps your understanding of leadership?
It's almost the same as in, there are great successes and there are great failures in your own life. And there are great examples of good leadership that you see around you. And again, because I've been fortunate enough to work in different sectors and different environments. And at a very early stage in my career in management consultancy, I got exposed to quite senior people and got to see how they behave. And either way, through your career, whether tacitly or whether, directly, you will see this behavior and you'll absorb some of it, or you might reject some of it. And that plays a huge part in how you decide to behave as a leader, whether you're conscious of it or not. And I saw some things which I really admired. I saw some, the way people approach challenges. Some of the things. Well, the first person I really sort of admired, the person I was working for, he had actually, it was the first management consulting I worked for. I was very lucky. By the way, let me just go back a bit. Failures, right? Failures are very important. I mentioned that earlier. I had a degree in architecture. I'd come from UCL. I liked art and music. And I then decided I wanted to be a management consultant. And that wasn't sort of a just pick it out of the air kind of conversation. I spent a couple of years doing different things, and somebody said to me, who I admired a lot, "You sound like a management consultant," and I hadn't explored what that meant. But by exploring it, I faced a lot of rejection because people couldn't put A and B together. They couldn't see me with my limited background. By the way, you've just graduated. There's not so much that you've done. But they couldn't see that fitting the mold of a management consultant. So, the old thing, I had a couple of drawers full of rejection letters from every company under the sun. And then I got a job with a very small firm. And the man who ran it, he was a fantastic man. But what he demonstrated was a huge amount of both charisma and intellect. And that was his start. Right? He was very charismatic. I'll give you an example why. He'd turn up at a client offices and he'd either arrive and wearing a suit, but in a very old, if people remember the old VW Golf Beetle car, he'd arrive in one of those, or he'd arrive on a Harley Davidson motorbike. These were his two modes of travel. And you'd sort of see this guy arriving and you think, is that how the boss arrives? And he didn't care, but he pulled off that charm, but he had the intellect as well. It had made a big impression on me that you don't have to conform. You don't have to conform to other people's ideas and ideals of what car you should be driving and how you should be arriving at the office and so on and so forth. If you are confident enough in what you believe in and you are comfortable in what you want to do. And as somebody, by the way, again, I don't conform. I don't conform to the masses, as I said. I have a turban wearing seat. But if I'm comfortable in who I am, then other people will be comfortable in who they are around you. And that applies to everybody. I mean, if you are comfortable, people around you will be comfortable. So that was really important at the start, and amongst other things that I learned from him. Mm-hmm. But then again, leaders along the way. The next person I worked for in a bigger consultancy, a really strategic man, someone who had a plan, always was looking ahead at the challenges. But what he did was highlight to me how some of the things that I was actually doing were strategic, even though I wasn't consciously aware of the strategy I was deploying. And he sort of unveiled that to me and helped me to start thinking strategically. And that I thought was hugely significant. Again, something to take away. But then there are times when, you work with leaders who don't display behavior that you want to embody. And there was a time when I was working on quite a major project, and having done a lot of work as a team, we pulled together a new plan. And the leader walked in and said, "Well, that's all great then, but it's never going to work, is it? Because these things always fail." Now that was hugely demoralizing to a team who had just spent the best part of 9 months renegotiating a very big plan, commercial plan. And I thought, wow, that's not what I believe. And I challenged that person in the meeting, even though I was quite junior and probably shouldn't have, but I challenged him and said, "No, look, I think we can do this." And in fact, in the meeting, I bet him £50 that we would. And we did. Wow. But, not taking on other people's traits in one way is as important, or acknowledging what you think doesn't work is as important as taking on some of the things that you see do work and you can learn from.
Mm-hmm. I really like what you mentioned there, Kulveer, because I think you went a little bit into some of the characteristics of good leaders. And obviously you've mentioned this authenticity of coming to work as you are and kind of presenting that integrity wherever you are as a leader. but you've also touched a little bit on what it means perhaps not to be a good leader, you know, perhaps taking credit when the credit is due to the whole team or to everyone else who has helped. So along the same lines, we've just had a question from Emma, who actually is thanking you for joining us today. And she says that one of the aims of the Laidlaw Scholarship is to produce ethical leaders. So what do you think it means to be an ethical leader? And do you think there is a difference between being a good leader and an ethical leader?
Well, hi, Emma, and thanks for your question. I think, I don't think there's any exclusivity between good and ethical. I think they go hand in hand. Because, let's be honest, if you're not being ethical, it's hard to be considered, good in terms of what you are doing in your leadership role, the moral compass you are presenting to people, because it will be visible to people. And you mentioned teams there, Daniela, as well, in terms of, how do teams work? Leadership is about leading, yes, teams, but probably even more people than teams, because you manage teams, you have to lead organizations and big structural bodies. And therefore, your principles, your ethics are on display to everyone. And I think, it's become even more important, which is a good thing, because as time has gone on, transparency about what people stand for, what they believe in, is what people want to know to feel comfortable about following that leader, whether it be a leader of the organization you work in, or whether that be a charity, or whether that be even in politics. We all know we look for transparency. We look for the understanding that we can trust what people are telling us. And that comes from what you do and your ethical principles. So I think if you are ethical, if you are transparent, then I do believe you will be being a good leader, or a good person even, which I think is at the core of leading other people.
Lovely question, by the way, Emma. I think that's such an important question. She's also thanking you for the answer. And perhaps kind of going along the same line, how would you describe your leadership style? Tell us a little bit about your leadership experience, whether you manage teams, whether you've had challenges as a leader. And obviously we are now going through challenging times as well. So I wonder whether you would be able perhaps to describe what your leadership style is, and obviously what does it take to be a leader today?
It's a very complex question, Daniela. On all of those fronts, what we're going through today, what it takes, my own stuff. Look, I'll be honest and say it's always evolving. Your leadership style, like your own personality, to a certain degree, is always evolving. There are some cornerstones within you as an individual that will always be there, but things do move, and you learn, and we all learn. We're all learning as we go along. But I have had to manage teams now. I think the first time I was really shocked, because when you have to manage and start developing an approach to leading people, you suddenly have to focus on other people rather than yourself. Up until that time, a lot of us, quite normally, will focus on me, my life, what I want to do, where I want to go, how I want to be, what I want to wear, what I want to eat. But being a leader, suddenly to flip that balance and start thinking more about other people, because you have to take care of those other people. You have a responsibility, no doubt, as a leader to other people. Therefore, your priority becomes other people and what they are doing. And then how do you help them get to where they want to go? Because actually leadership is about helping other people. So leadership takes you from being, at the center of the universe and it all being about you, to you looking at everybody else and saying, how do I help and support all these other people? And that's how I've seen it. And I've tried to take on, I've tried to also play to my strengths. I am someone, a creative person inherently. I like creativity. I like engaging people. I like to talk to people. I like to hear from people. But you have to take people on somewhere. You have to have a vision. and you have to be able to describe that. And that's why I think communication has become such an important part of my life and my career. Because as I went through my career, I realized that actually, and you'll hear this a lot, lots and lots and lots of people have good ideas, but not all good ideas materialize or become reality. And it was like those projects I worked on in management consultancy, major projects, big infrastructure projects, not all of them worked. And it wasn't because they weren't good ideas. It'd be because there was something wrong in how they were communicated. There was something wrong in how people didn't have the right faith or trust in the idea or the people delivering them. And so that part of how do you communicate, how do you engage, how do you build trust becomes one of the vital ingredients in success from my perspective, but also for a leader in being successful and in taking people with them as they seek to achieve what they're trying to achieve.
Mm-hmm. So you've said a lot there in terms of playing to your strengths, helping other people. I really like the way you almost define leadership here. Leadership is about helping other people. And it's about bringing the best in people. And also it's about having that vision. But I think one of the things that is absolutely essential, and I love the way you've actually articulated that, is making sure that you communicate that vision. Because you're right, we might have such great ideas, but if we're not able to communicate that in such a way that other people resonate with our vision and our ideas, they can be lost, although they might be great ideas.
Daniela, sorry, on that point, and if you want to quantify it, you know, I always say to my teams and people who work with me, it's the 20-80 rule. So the work you do to build an idea to, you know, whether it's a report or a project, a plan, a product, whatever it may be, everyone feels that's the work, right? Get that report done, build that model, or, you know, develop something, whatever it may be, that's the real work. That's 20% of the work. The other 80%, I'll get into frame, is telling other people about it, getting them excited about it, getting them convinced that actually what you're talking about, what you're doing, they should listen. They should actually be part of it. They should be encouraged. They should support it. Because if that 80% doesn't happen, then all that effort you put into that 20%, which you thought was all of it, it doesn't occur. That thing doesn't go anywhere. So that's why that 20-80 rule. 20%, yes, get the idea right. 80% get other people excited about the idea.
Absolutely. And that actually kind of emphasizes the need of a leader to have very good followers. And you can't have good followers unless they understand what your vision is. And unless they know how to support you in that vision. So I really like the way you've also mentioned building that trust, because that's one of the key elements in kind of helping others to follow through your vision. So we have a question that has come through from Nathaniel Beckett. He says, "Hi, Kulveer, could you please tell us about what resources you have used to develop your leadership style? For example, do you have a book that has really influenced you, or have you mostly learned this in situations?"
So, hi, Nathaniel. Hope you're well. I have lots of books. They're all in boxes at the moment, I will say. But two ways, I think, if I can boil it down. One is, yes, it's been by, as I was saying, looking and listening to other people who I was exposed to, other experienced people. And the more experienced, the better, I used to think, and I still believe, because their wealth of knowledge is something worth tapping into, right? So experience is something that businesses pay a lot of money for, because those people with experience will probably have done things a number of times and learned something from them, and hopefully not make similar errors, but also pass on good practice. So listening and learning to, whether they be good experienced managers, but good leaders, any opportunity you can get, take it. You know, even if that means listening to people on television. And I love hearing fantastic speeches from leaders. You know, they're crafted, it brings together my last point about communication. So reading speeches, watching old speeches, great speeches from great people, like, you know, you can understand when you talk about people like Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi, and figures like that. but also business people, Jack Welch, Mike Bloomberg, people who have had fantastic business careers. It's really interesting to understand from them how they think. And if you find any opportunities to do that, or read their books as well. So you pick it up where you can, and personally, that's what I've done, and then sort of reflected on it.
Mm-hmm. You're right. And I think there's so much to gain from leadership in practice, or leadership in action. And I think we learn a lot from this kind of school of life, which is all about really listening and observing and learning from the experiences of others, but also from our own experience, just like you've done, bringing forward your insights, your leadership insights from your own experience.
Actually, Daniela, can I just add, I've also been very fortunate to go on a few courses, a few sort of executive courses at INSEAD, at Harvard, and that there is something quite powerful also to hear from academics who research into leadership. Now, I wanted to say that because I believe, like you just said, that there's a huge amount to learn from actual practice, and pretty much the majority of what I've learned is in practice. But that exposure I had to some of those amazing professors on very short courses, I did a couple of very short courses, did give me actually a lot of insight into the academic research into leadership and behavior, and then you get into corporate theory and organization, and we haven't touched on it yet, but it is probably the most important word, culture, because culture plays such a major part in leadership, because a leadership style is based on the culture of whichever organization you're in. I think knowing a bit about that, and I was very fortunate to get that on under my belt quite early, because I did a business course at Kingston Business School after I graduated. By the way, I had to do that to convince people that I could do business. So I had a degree in architecture, but I did the business course because I said, look, I can do business. But that introduced me to people like Charles Handy, who's a very learned academic in the field of culture, and Edgar Schein, and other people like that. And you bring all these elements together.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. Excellent. Thank you for that answer, Kulveer. We just had another question from Lorenzo. So Lorenzo says, hi, Kulveer. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today. In light of the current crisis which we are facing, and climate, health, and economical, what are the key features that you think a leader should have or display?
It's a really good question, Lorenzo. Thank you. I think all leaders are being tested by that question at the moment. Don't panic. It's easy to say and we smile, but you know what? Sometimes one of the key parts of leadership is remaining calm, because you emanate how you feel to all those people that you are leading. And even though you have the biggest challenges, and right now one of the biggest challenges the world has ever faced, and all leaders are facing it, being calm, being measured, taking your time, and really having good people around you to help you meet the challenge is really important in being a good leader. And I don't say that's the only thing, but it's a huge part of what we've seen right now, with so many leaders having to face this challenge of the health crisis that we've all been seeing over the last couple of months.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you. If anyone else has a question, oh yes, Ruth has just come through. So she says, hi, Kulveer. So this is Ruth from UCL, who remembers you since you were a student. There you go. What you said about culture was really interesting. How can you step back from the culture when you're in the thick of it and be able to critically assess it? Great question, Ruth.
Great question, Ruth. Great question. So I think it's always hard when you're within an organization, and it's one of the reasons why organizations, and I'm not beating the drum here for management consultancy by no means, right? So there's many things you can do, but great advisors, consultancies. Daniela, you're about to do something like this, and your brave new step, exciting step as an entrepreneur. The reason why you would bring people like Daniela or external people in and talk to them is because they can help you get that sort of external view when you're in the middle of something that it's hard to look out on. Now, that doesn't mean you can't. I absolutely believe that you can, within an organization, identify some of the challenges, some of the issues, some of the cultural challenges that might be there. But it's hard to get traction with that conversation internally because you are part of that conversation, you're involved in it. It's probably, something you've helped shape. So it's always useful to have internal sponsors that discuss culture, both the pros and cons of it within an organization. It's hugely valuable. Don't think that this has no commercial value to a business. A business with a healthy culture adds a lot to the bottom line and to the share price and to output and to the well-being of its employees, as much as a business with a negative culture does the opposite. So it is hugely valued by industry and businesses. And I think you need internal sponsors who spot that route. But you can also utilize external people and organizations to help to get analysis and understanding of what you can do.
Mm-hmm. You're so right about that, Kulveer, because I think we all have a blind spot, and I think organizations also have a blind spot. And it's sometimes about asking for feedback and open feedback and receiving that open feedback and being able to recognize what works and what doesn't, and then to action on it. So you're right, sometimes it's very useful to have that external view and to have those open conversations around what works and what doesn't, and what could be changed. Lorenzo just said, thank you for your answer. And your answer actually just reminded him of Jacinda Ardern, the PM of New Zealand, who calmly reported that an earthquake was happening during a TV interview. She was definitely not panicking. So going back to how can a leader really face today's changing environment is kind of that being calm and being measured. So I have a question for you while other people are thinking about questions. Do you think leaders are born or made?
It's a very good question. It's one that has been asked many times to many more smarter people than me, I would say, to answer. But in my own humble opinion, I think it's probably a bit of both. I think, we're all born with our personalities that then develop and evolve through our experiences and what we learn and channel and everything else. And we're influenced. We hear this term nowadays, influencing. We're all being influenced. And as much as that helps you to grow and develop, being a leader also means that you can hold a course, right? You have to be someone who influences others. You can't, if you are someone who gets moved around a lot and gets influenced in either direction, then it would be hard to be a leader, because people look for leadership for clear, decisive, structured view on where they're heading. If you're moving around, that's not very good for the people you're leading. Obviously, you hopefully are leading them in the right direction. So a lot of it comes from what's your own natural personality and what's your own style, coupled with what have you learned in your adventure, as I call it, to becoming a leader. And I would have to say it is absolutely a bit of both. It's a bit of, learning, developing, and it's a bit of what are you born with? Because look, we don't all need to be leaders, let's be honest. Okay, so this is not every single one of us needs to be a leader, or we don't all have to be leaders all at the same time. So there are different times when we step into a leadership role, and that could be, in a team, or in a social environment, or at work for a certain period of time, and then we step back and somebody else can take on the leadership role. So leadership is a dynamic thing that can continue to evolve. And I always say the best examples are always through sport, because you see how leadership changes in sport, in teams, all kinds of things. And that's a really good way of seeing dynamic leadership in action.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Wonderful. We have another question now from Siddharth. She says, hi, Kulveer. How do you translate ideas from a cognitive space to practicality in a political system where there are so many rigidities? We oftentimes forget that mediocrity exists because there are deadlines, and from this, she's asking us this question. Could you run us through some difficulties you faced and how have you dealt with them? Also, thank you so much for taking the time out to be here with us.
Well, hi, Siddharth. And this is you've got some good questions coming into there. This is a really tough one, but it's a really good question because, look, anybody who tries to deliver, and let's be honest, what we're talking about here is change. Okay. Whenever you hear people say, oh yeah, we want change. We want to have a change program or a transformation program or deliver something new, whatever it may be. Everyone goes, hurrah, yes, we want change. And then it becomes really hard to deliver. Why is that? And there's been lots, and I mean, thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of studies into why change doesn't always succeed and why that doesn't happen. But it's because people actually want change, but they find it hard to adapt. We all find it hard to adapt to something. We like the way things are normally. We don't like change. We don't want to move our bed into a different position or paint the wall a different color, or because why do we want to change things? It's good how they are. But if you could, and you could show that it would improve something, still would you not want it? What would it take to get you to be convinced? And that's why I come back to the point around the 2080 rule. A good idea. How do you actually deliver it? You have to have that ability to build trust, communicate. That's the hard work. That's the hard yards of getting something to move. It's like a glacial object moving at the slowest pace. How can you get it to accelerate? And in politics, it's really hard because it's not a pyramid organization, even though a lot of organizations pyramid private sector in an industry structure, you have a pathway to the top and it's quite structured and you might know where people are. But in politics, it's a lot flatter. You have to build networks and coalitions and get people on board and convince more so people who don't have to agree or may have an alternative view for many reasons. So in the political world and in the public sector, it's that much harder because of that flatness. And flatness means democracy, which is a good thing. That means a lot of people's voices are equally weighted. And therefore, you have to get people even more so bound together on a good idea to get it to become a reality. So it's challenging. And anyone who does succeed and does manage to deliver in a political environment, kudos to them, he says, because of those challenges. And I can give you some tangible examples. Let me give you one that probably is very well known in terms of what I did. The London Cycle Hire Scheme, which was something that I led a program project for Boris Johnson when he was mayor. And, there were many, many, many people who would say that this was not the right thing to do, that it was too difficult, it was not going to work in a city like London, it is dangerous, all the bikes would get stolen, there's not enough places on the street, it's a good idea, but I don't want one of these docking stations on my street. And on and on and on. Lots of reasons why we couldn't do this. But you had to keep going and convince people that it was the right thing to do, that we could make it safe, that we won't have the malls stolen, that it would look lovely on the streets of London, that they feel encouraged to use them. And by the way, when I talk about a large stakeholder group, when you're talking about something like the Cycle Hire Scheme, which, when we launched with 5,000 bicycles, and actually it's going to be 10 years next month that it launched. There were only 5,000 bicycles at the start. But London is full of almost 8 million people. And everybody had a view on these bicycles. But only a small number of people would, and probably still do, ever ride them. But because they were going to be so visible, because they would be on the streets of London, everybody had, quite rightly, a stake in them as a Londoner to say, I have a view on whether these things should go here, whether they're right for my city, whether they look right, whether they feel right, whether there'll be a benefit. And that was the job we had to do to convince people that they would be that it was the right thing to do. And then, let's be honest, they had to work, and they did. So that's an example of, an idea that is a good idea, but you've got to convince a lot more people than you probably originally thought to make sure that the idea actually then can happen and be seen as a success.
Absolutely. But it's also a lovely example of determination, really, because you are determined to kind of show that the positives and the benefits would outweigh the negatives. And obviously you've done it, and it's now successful. People are really making use of them.
Yes, and by the way, I've got to acknowledge that there's political capital at use here. So, again, leadership. Boris, when he was mayor, it was his political capital, his leadership that we were leveraging to get this right. Yeah. It's his responsibility. Yeah. And he, as a leader, is also saying, yes, this can work, but he's then building a team behind him to help make that happen. All of these things are part of leadership to get a good thing to then come to fruition.
Wonderful. Siddharth just said, thank you so much for the answer. The example was quite an insight. We have had two more questions that have come through. So one of them is from Giorgio, who says, hi, Kulveer. I was wondering if you have any insights on managing conflicts and disagreements as a leader. And obviously you have kind of mentioned this example, but are there any insights perhaps that you might have around how a leader might go around managing conflicts or disagreements in their team?
Yeah, look, Giorgio, another good question, because there is always going to be not necessarily direct conflict, but conflicting ideas on what to do, a priority, how to approach something. And I think, as a leader, the question is, how do you mediate between that? How do you find a center ground? Now, that's a real sort of, some might say that's a bit of a cop-out answer, because, sometimes you can't mediate and you have to find a way through. And that is the challenge for the leader. But the key thing is to really listen to what people are saying, really take on the advice that you're getting before you make a decision. And again, I will point to Boris Johnson as someone I work with, who, one of the things, if I talk about Boris, and I'm asking a lot about Boris, this is not about him, as a politician, but him as a person. And anyone who's experienced him will say this. He does listen to everybody, even sometimes to a detriment. He'll take on a whole spectrum of views around the topic or a question or an issue that there is. And then he'll step back and take a view and look to make a decision. So, when there is conflict, and if it's conflict within a narrow band, sometimes the best thing to do is step back and take more views to help smooth a view or find the right way to go forward.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. I think perhaps as a follow-up on that, Kushi also asks whether you have any insights on how to get work done when your team is uninterested or demotivated.
That's a really good question, Kushi. So what's your team doing? I want to say, and maybe you want to ask them why they're demotivated. Look, the serious point is maybe less focus on the work and maybe a bit more focus on the team is required in that scenario. Because, if your team isn't functioning, then it's really hard to get anything done. And maybe, again, stepping back, putting the work to one side and trying to understand what are the dynamics at work within the team that are causing, it not to function, not to perform, is the best thing to do in that situation, because you probably won't find a solution by just carrying on and trying to do more work and it not happening. So it really is about, as I said, I think earlier, as a leader, you focus almost less on yourself and probably less on the work and more on the people, because if the people feel that they're being heard, if the people feel good, if the people feel that, they trust you, you're probably more likely to get more output and work done from them than the alternative.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Excellent. Well, we are coming to the end of our discussion, but just as a final point. So you've just spoken to Laidlaw scholars from around the world who we believe that one day they will be the leaders of tomorrow. These are highly motivated students and researchers who surely will have an impact in this world. So what would be your top tips or your top tip perhaps to someone who's somehow at the start of their leadership adventure, to use your expression?
Well, firstly, I would say it's been really good fun. Thank you. I've enjoyed all the questions, and thank you for asking me to be part of this first virtual session. I do feel privileged. And it's lovely to hear from the Laidlaw scholars. Listen, what Daniela just said is fantastic, but it could feel like quite a bit of pressure on your shoulders as well. So I think one thing I'll say to you all is your life and careers and everything are ahead of you. Right now, enjoy the moment you're in. You're probably all at that early stage of thinking about what you're going to do and who you're going to be. You have time to explore, to be creative, to try things, and yes, to fail, and find out what you like, what really makes you passionate. Because fundamentally, in my adventure, it's been those passionate moments, those exciting moments, those things that have thrilled me, that have propelled me forward to find the next thing to do. And if I would give any advice, I'd say, find those passionate things, find that sense that excites you, and then hopefully you'll also find things that will propel you forward. And no doubt, I'm sure being a scholar in this program means that you're well on your way to being on that adventure.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Just so you know, Kulveer, there are some lovely messages coming through the chat, thanking you for sharing all your wisdom. I'd also just want to say thank you for your insights. I think what I've picked up is about the fact that leadership is an adventure, and it is a continuous process, and it's dynamic, and it's something that will continuously evolve. So my advice to our Laidlaw scholars is to remember that actually things change, and given that we are in such a changing environment, I do hope that we'll be able to learn from one another even more, and to really listen to these insights, because I think every single one of us, and even our scholars, have so many insights from which we can learn. So thank you so much for your time, Kulveer. Thank you to everyone who's joined us. Also, thank you to Annie Thompson from UCL alumni, who has put us in touch with you, and to the Laidlaw scholars and organizers of today. Thank you very much. I will end the recording. Have a lovely day.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Bye-bye.